Okay, let's get started. So hello again. My name is Letty Farden. I'm delighted to be welcoming you to our series, A Glass with Our Growers. This evening, we are all the way over to Bordeaux with Charlotte, who is shortly going to introduce herself. And we've got three delicious wines to taste, the Exuberance Rosé, Petit Cantenac 2017 and Clos Cantenac 2016. I don't know whether you've had a chance to cook Charlotte's recipe, but hopefully you've received that as well, which looks mouthwateringly good, I think, and a nice one to straddle all of them. So maybe that's in the oven. I don't know. So this evening, what we're going to do is first and foremost, a quick note on logistics. The chat is enabled. Please do use it if you have any questions or any comments. It makes it a much more interactive, fun session if we can hear from you. So please don't hesitate to ask. But we are just the two of us on video, but we'll be picking up the questions as we go along. First of all, Charlotte's going to give us a little bit of an introduction about herself and her family and our long working relationship together. And then we will go on to taste the Rosé first, then Petit Cantenac, and finally finishing with Clos Cantenac. So I hope you're ready for an evening of fabulous drinking. So welcome, Charlotte.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for having me back again. It's nice to do these, and thank you to everybody who's joining us tonight, and to Private Cellar for hosting them. So as Letty said, I'll tell you a little bit about myself and my family history or background, how we ended up in Bordeaux. So it was actually my father who always well, half Polish, half German, was born in England, and sort of born on a farm, but had moved to the city and was working in London for 30 odd years when he decided he really wanted to get back to his roots, back to farming life. He had a huge passion for wine, and in particular Bordeaux wine, and started spending more and more time over in Bordeaux, and predominantly at a chateau in the Entre de Mer, which was Chateau de Sur. As he became more and more invested in the company, he started putting more and more shares into it, and he finally took control of the company in 2003 and sold his business in the city 2006, and was pretty much living in Bordeaux full time by 2007. So at that time, 2006 was when I sort of graduated from school. I was 18 years old, and I didn't really know what I wanted to do with my life. So I went over to Chateau de Sur, and I did a harvest, but just in the vineyard, picking grapes, just to make some money for my gap year, really. I wanted to go spend some time in Southeast Asia, which I did afterwards. But during that time, we had a South African winemaker who really motivated me to come taste the juice in the cellar, to see what was going on, to get involved in the pump overs, the cleaning and the things like this. And growing up in London, I'd never imagined that. I sort of knew that I could work in the wine industry possibly one day, but I never imagined that I could actually be a winemaker in the wine industry. So he offered me a job on my gap year to come straight to South Africa after, for the harvest in February time. So I did that, and I went over to South Africa, and I just fell in love with it. He took me to Stellenbosch University and to a couple of other agricultural colleges, to show me, that I could study. And straight away I was hooked. That's what I decided I wanted to do. I would have loved to go to Stellenbosch University, but they were doing all of their lectures in Afrikaans at the time. So
wow.
I decided
my language barrier then.
And considering I had no French at the time, I sort of ruled out Bordeaux University as well, unfortunately. But I did find one course in England at Plumpton College that was doing a degree in viticulture and enology. So I signed up to do that, and started that the year after. And then after that, I traveled around the world a little bit, following the harvests. So I went going from northern to southern hemisphere for a few years. Ended up in New Zealand, which I just fell in love with, and got offered a full-time position in the Hawke's Bay, which was predominantly sort of a red wine region. They made some great Chardonnay as well, but at the time they were very focused on their Bordeaux blends. So I thought that was, you know, something that I already knew a little bit about. And meant to stay for 2 years, ended up staying for nearly 7. During that time, Dad had been busy in Bordeaux. In 2007 or 6, he had invested in Clos Cantenac, which we are going to be tasting tonight, with 2 other partners. Their first vintage was 2007. And by 2015, he had sold Chateau de Seux in the Entre-deux-Mers, and in 2016 he'd been offered 2 hectares in Pomerol. So he went down from 85 hectares in the Entre-deux-Mers to just 2 hectares in Pomerol, at which time the winemaker at Clos Cantenac resigned, and he asked, I got a phone call one evening saying, okay, I think you should come work with me in Bordeaux. I was excited.
I've heard as well from Nicola that your dad can be very persuasive.
Oh yeah, and he likes to get his way as well.
It was kind of, was it a 3-line whip, or it was a conversation?
It was a conversation, and it was something that I really wanted to do, but I kind of felt like I wasn't finished with New Zealand at the same time. I'd got myself into a pretty good position. I wanted to leave New Zealand with the minimum of an assistant winemaker position, which I kind of knew I would have in 1 year's time as well.
Okay.
So I was sort of drawn. So we came to a good arrangement that I would come over and spend 3-4 months of the year in Bordeaux, which would cover all of the harvest period, plus the blending of the previous vintage's wine. And then I'd go back to New Zealand afterwards. So I managed to arrange this with my winery in New Zealand as well, which was very lucky to be able to do that. So from 2015 until 2018, I did 3-4 months in New Zealand and in Bordeaux, and the rest of the time in New Zealand. At which stage I sort of thought, okay, Chateau Seraphine is growing a little bit now. It's requiring a little bit more work. It's pretty tiring spending my holidays doing another harvest.
Yeah, and a lot of traveling as well. Not
and a lot of traveling as well. So I came back to Bordeaux full time at the start of, or midway through 2018, and yeah, I've been here ever since.
Fantastic. Well, it's absolutely wonderful. So this evening we're going to be tasting all of the vintages that you've looked after then.
Yeah, exactly. 2015 being my first one. So 16, I was the first one that I can fully claim I was there for the harvest and the bottling for. So I sort of did everything all the way through.
Oh, brilliant. So we can ask any question then and you'll know all the answers. Brilliant.
Absolutely.
Before we start tasting the rosé, just quickly, can you, everyone has your lovely lemon chicken recipe. Is this something that you think goes well with all the wines, or when would you guys have this?
I was trying to think of a recipe to pair with all the wines, and for me, I don't know what the weather's like today in Bordeaux, but with the potatoes in the oven, it's a nice, easy recipe, something you can do midweek, which we're at. Yeah. You can throw in the oven, forget about it a little bit, and pull it out. Potatoes, nice comforting meal. It's with the red wine, it works perfectly. Or, you know, I do it quite often in the summer for a nice easy lunch. Substitute the potatoes for some couscous or some crusty bread or something like that. Just sitting outside in the sun, a nice lunch with the rosé. So yeah, kind of brilliant. Perfectly for all the wines. So
no, it's definitely
easy for tonight's dinner.
I'm definitely printing it off and saving into my recipe collection. I especially liked that it's a whole bulb of garlic, which is always a good thing. Yeah. Good thing in my view. Anyway, we digress. So, shall we taste the first wine? Beautiful.
Absolutely.
Excellent.
All right.
Oh, there's someone who's having a whole chicken, and it's in the oven right now. So that's yeah. Okay, so Exuberance 2021. Shall we very, very quickly, because there's not a lot of good things to say about it, but talk about the vintage before we talk about the wine. And please do start tasting, everyone, and we'll go through the intricacies of the wine afterwards, but please start drinking.
Um, 21 was a challenging vintage, as we like to say here in Bordeaux. But do you know what? It means that for the white wine and the rosé, it was because it was a cooler vintage all the way through. It actually ended up being a perfect vintage for the rosé. Something that I'm sure we're going to touch on this evening because it's a big topic of discussion in Bordeaux at the moment anyway, is climate change. And with the temperatures getting higher and higher in Bordeaux each year, we're struggling to make more delicate style wines. That's for the red as well. So a vintage like 2021, where you have those cooler temperatures, which really help lock in the acidity and keep a lot of that sort of red, fresher fruit characters, means that, you know, everybody, white wine, it's a standout year in Bordeaux. Rosé, although there's not so much rosé produced in Bordeaux, but for me it was absolutely perfect on paper for a rosé vintage. Red wines, there's some, you know, it was more challenging to get a lot of structure into the wine, to get a lot of those riper flavors coming through as well. But we're talking about the rosé, so
well, I feel like since we are talking about the rosé, I just need to say that this isn't very commonplace, is it? There's not a lot of premium, wonderful, fabulous rosés like this in Bordeaux, is there?
There's not. Bordeaux rosé was something that has been overlooked for years. I mean, Bordeaux really is about its red wine, and even its white wine is sort of second class in a way. When you think about Bordeaux, rosé really doesn't get a look in. It used to be back in the day that rosé in Bordeaux was very much made because of from the Saignée method. The Saignée method is when you're harvesting red wine. In order to concentrate the red wine more, you take off as the fruit goes into the tank, it's lightly crushed so that you expose some juice, and you siphon off the juice immediately in order to concentrate the wine. And the juice is very high in sugar, it's got some flavor, but at that time it has very little of the phenolics, the skin of which come from the skin, and they take all of the color and the tannin.
Yeah.
So that's how they would make the rosé. You'd have this leftover juice, which nobody really knew what they wanted to do with. They don't want to put it down the drain because you're losing money.
Yeah.
So you ferment it as a white wine in order to make a rosé. And this is a method still used today. It's not how we make our rosé. I'll talk about that after. But this method is very much it's a second thought for rosé, because you're growing the grapes as if you want to make red wine, and you're harvesting them when they are ripe enough for a red wine. They have all of the phenolic ripeness for red wine, which
so
doesn't actually
like a rosé. Yeah.
With rosé, what you're looking for a good rosé. So because of that, I think the quality of rosé in Bordeaux has never been that high in the past.
Yeah.
There are a lot of producers making it in the same way which we are now. So the way that we make it is we designate vineyards for the rosé. So we have one vineyard which is in the Entre de Mer, actually very close to where Château de Sour used to be. It's on a limestone plateau, and the limestone really helps for the rosé because even in the hotter years, it helps lock in that acidity into the wine. So you end up with a nice pH and a good balance, that acidity that can still go through. We pick earlier.
So as well, this is 100% Merlot, isn't it? This rosé.
It's 100% Merlot.
Quite unusual.
Again, yes, yeah. From Bordeaux, though, we're not given so many other choices. Yeah. And we are predominantly a Merlot-based winery, so it sort of makes sense to continue that theme through. So we're picking when the alcohol's lower, which also means that there's very little phenolic ripeness at the time. So that's why we end up with this really beautiful pink color, and it's not too dark. Yeah. The longer you wait, the more color you will extract in the ripening process.
I mean, the color is stunning, and it's a very fun bottle as well.
Aesthetically, I think it's very nice, and I definitely can't take the credit for that, but we did spend a long time coming up with something that looks beautiful, because it's something, you know, drinking a bottle of rosé, it's on the table middle of summer, and it's a talking point, isn't it? You know, and making a serious rosé, we didn't want something that, you know, people are just going to gulp down next to the swimming pool. definitely a time and place for those sorts of rosés at all. But this is really a food rosé and something we want to take centerpiece at the table during, summer, can be winter as well, doesn't matter. But
no, this is not a this is a serious wine, and I think it's important as well to mention that if this is a style of wine that you enjoy and and you think it's very, very smart and it goes with, incredibly versatile. Charlotte really is one of the rosé trailblazers in Bordeaux, and she also makes a premium, an even more premium rosé, Elegance, which is mind-numbingly delicious and very age-worthy and different to what the preconception is for rosé. That's kind of because would you explain very briefly, without, I know we don't have it in front of us, but how you make the Elegance and why it's so unique?
For both of the rosés, what I'm trying to, exactly what I was saying before, trying to make it a complex rosé, something interesting to be talked about and something which goes well with food as well. So both of them are a direct press, so we get a very light colour coming through. For the L'Exuberance rosé, it's about 70–80% fermented in tank, stainless steel tank, which keeps a lot of the freshness in it. A small amount of oak barrel, and I'm just talking about this because, and then for the Elegance rosé, which is the higher tier one, we do it same direct press, but then we ferment it in 2 700-litre, so 7 hectoliter concrete eggs. And the idea behind the concrete eggs, as well as the barrels, is it allows some oxygen ingress to come into the wine, which is quite controversial for a rosé because you think you have to really protect it. But allowing this oxygen lets the wine breathe a little bit and actually helps mature it, meaning that once it's in bottle, it will actually age for longer as well. And we do a process in the barrels and in the egg called batonnage, or it's a lees stirring. So at the end of fermentation, the dead yeast cells will settle to the bottom of whatever vessel they're in. And the more you incorporate them into the wine, the more complex mouthfeel you will get from the wine, but also it helps for the aging of the wine because it helps protect against oxygen. And the shape of the concrete egg means that you have this natural force. So as the wine gets warmer, as it always does, it will sort of rise to the top a little bit. It has nowhere to go and it's forced back under, and it keeps these lees in suspension. So they're always constantly a small amount of this lees stirring going on through, and we do that from the end of fermentation. So that would be sort of September, October time. And they're still in the same concrete eggs today. And we will bottle this wine in June, talking about the 2022 harvest. So it's there for 7–8 months, constantly with this thermodynamics going on inside of it, which really helps to mature the wine. And like I said, gives it this beautiful element where it can age. A lot of wine critics have said to us, tasting it blind, or it's like a white wine. It's very, very complex. And especially to drink it a year or two after, it really ages more like a complex white wine than any other rosé on the market.
I can totally believe that. And I'll be honest, if I was having it blindfolded, I think I would you could see how it could easily be confused with a white. So,
yeah.
A couple of questions have come in. First of all, just to clarify, were you saying that the rosé vineyards whereabouts are the rosé vineyards specifically? So
they're in the Entre-deux-Mers. So although we are producing the wine within Saint Emilion, the rosé, there is no appellation for a Saint Emilion rosé.
Okay.
So for the first couple of years, the first year we made the rosé was in 2015, the first year that I was in Bordeaux. So I think for 15 and 16, we were using Saint Emilion fruit, which was nice. And I was very happy with the results that we had. But the climate in Saint Emilion is warmer. We have small microclimates all over Bordeaux, and the soil type is really meant for these red wines, hence why Saint Emilion is a red wine area alone. So doing a little bit of research around the area, I knew the area around Saint Quentin quite well, so it's sort of one of the first areas I started looking for vineyards. And it meant that, so it's only 20 minutes from us by car, but the terroir changes quite significantly. It's much, much higher altitude, slightly cooler. And then, like I said before, this limestone plateau, which is really important for us, rather than these more gravelly or clay soils that we have in Saint Emilion. So it's the rosé itself is an Appellation Bordeaux rosé.
That makes sense. And rosé sold in France versus the rest of the world, what does the export proportion look like
for us? We mainly export, and that goes across all of our wines. We do sell a little bit in France, predominantly direct to restaurants and things like that, where we possibly have connections or we know. Most of our wine comes to UK, most of it through Private Cellar.
We are very fortunate and grateful. Please never change that.
But then we do have a distribution sort of all around the world now, a lot in Europe. America is quite big for us, Australia, New Zealand. We've got some new customers in Japan, a bit in Dubai as well. So no, we're very lucky. We're a small company, but we're sort of very diverse. Yeah.
Right. Well, we've got 2 more wines to taste, and I can't miss the deadline, so we'll have to move on. Next up, we have Petit Cantenac. Would you like to just, in a nutshell, explain a little bit about this wine?
So Petit Cantenac is the little brother, as we like to say, of the Clos Cantenac wine. In Bordeaux, it is very traditional to have a first and a second wine for your property. And this is in order to be able to keep the level of the first wine very, very high in a more difficult year, especially like 2017 was. It means that you can really put all of your best grapes into the first wine and still have a second wine. I don't really like that explanation because it tends to mean that your second wine is not very good, which is not the case for us.
No, I was actually going to say, because I know you're very humble, but certainly the reviews I've read and the critics' scores and everything like that, that it says the message consistently is that this wine massively over delivers. And it's a super wine. It's really, really smashing.
So thank you very much. We try to differentiate against these wines so that it's not just, first, second wine. So because of that, we made the decision very early on. We had only, when we started the company, 3.5 hectare, I think it was. And now we're up to 6 hectare in production. And we didn't have any very good quality, high quality Cabernet vines at the time. Now we've got a lot more in production. But we made the decision to keep the first wine, Clos Cantenac, 100% Merlot, which meant that all of the Cabernet Franc and Cabernet Sauvignon was automatically going to go into the Petit Cantenac. And this, I think, was done predominantly on, again, trying to keep the first wine very good. But after those wines came into production and the quality really stepped up for the Petit Cantenac, for the Cabernets, we still continue to make that decision because it gives the wines 2 very different styles, keeping the first wine a very premium quality, but it makes the Petit Cantenac interesting. Yes. I also think that the Cabernets can be quite interesting, approachable, young. They give a vibrancy to the wine, a spiciness to it as well, and it changes the style a little bit. But apart from that, the wines are made in exactly the same way. We're 6 hectares, so we're very, very attention detailed in the vineyard. And then it's sort of very hands-off winemaking when it comes down to it. And there's very little differentiated between the two. We do try, when it comes to the blending stages, Petit Cantenac is a wine that we're looking to be able to be drunk younger. So I'm looking at that sort of aspect as well. Clos Cantenac, it
certainly feels super approachable already. The tannins are already but not completely resolved, but they're incredibly approachable and supple.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, and we use slightly less new wood as well because the new wood takes longer to integrate into the wine fully. A couple of other little winemaking techniques, but it really comes down to the blending, looking at the more concentrated wines, the bigger wines, the wines which will, tend to go a little bit more into Petit Cantenac. Sorry, my camera's moving automatically.
Very modern. I have to ask, because to me, the wines that I've been lucky enough to taste from you all have a certain kind of bond which links them, which is a really a smart kind of a precision and a cleanliness, which sometimes I tend to find that sometimes Bordeaux can be a little bit more musty. And I was wondering whether you think that what impact your experience on New Zealand has had on you as a winemaker in Bordeaux.
Definitely. I mean, I get asked that question a lot, and it's obviously had a big impact. I learnt most of my winemaking in New Zealand. When I started there, I was a cellar hand. You know, I really knew nothing. I moved to lab technician, so I was working with the winemaker to do all of the tastings and set up all the trials. And then eventually I sort of moved through the ranks, and I was an assistant winemaker by the time I left. So I really did take a lot from New Zealand. And it's true that the styles are very different. It was very interesting coming back and doing my back and forth for a couple of years, because in New Zealand, you have no rules and no regulations, whereas Bordeaux is very traditional, very...
There's one or two rules to abide by.
Exactly. You know, what varieties you grow, how much you can grow, your planting density, what you're allowed to harvest. So it does restrict you a little bit as to what style of wine you're going to be making in Bordeaux. But at the same time, I think it's very important, especially nowadays. I think the en primeur is something that will always go on. It's something very traditional to Bordeaux and very important to Bordeaux. But at the same time, we're not drinking wines the same way that we used to. It's very rare that people, my generation, really have these huge cellars under their house where they're storing wines for 10, 15 years before opening them. Yeah, really, it would, really. I mean, it's much more common these days to go downstairs and you've got a corner shop there, a convenience store, and you grab a bottle with whatever you're going to have for dinner. So that's something that in New Zealand was already very much of the opinion. They were making these wines, totally different terroirs and wine styles, but they were making these wines, red wines, to be drunk much, much earlier. Yeah. And that is something that I think I brought back with me, the idea that we can make these wines, fantastic wines, with the ability to age for a long time, but there is no reason why they shouldn't be approachable as younger wines as well.
Absolutely. No, well, you certainly feel that on this wine, I think. And I can imagine it really was quite a contrast, especially when you were going to and fro. Lots of adjustments, I'd imagine.
And 2017 is definitely a lighter style of wine as well. 2017 was the first year that we were hit by the frost in Bordeaux. First significant frost we had since 1991. So we actually at Clos Cantenac lost 50% of our yield in one night's frost, or 2 consecutive nights frost. And that was followed by quite a cold, a cooler summer. So it's a lighter style wine as well, so it will be slightly more approachable.
Because the harvest was quite early, and I know that, you know, lots of people struggled to reach ripeness in this vintage, didn't they?
Yeah, it definitely was. I think we had rain that came just as the harvest was due as well. So yeah, again,
we've had a question. Oh, sorry, I'm so sorry. No. We've had a question come in about frost prevention, and I have to ask it because you've just told me before we started this, and it's fascinating. So could you possibly briefly explain how you, other than crossing fingers, stop frost hopefully affecting your vineyards?
There's a lot of crossing fingers. That's really the main thing. No, we have, I was talking about the frost fans that we've just invested in. And this is something totally new to Bordeaux. 10 years ago, there wasn't a frost fan in sight. And now we're coming up to what is going to be the frost season. It's April, and you're starting to see them popping up in vineyards all over the place. A lot of them are mobile, so they get installed for the season, but some of them are permanent. So they're actually, you know, look like windmills, which are put in place and they stay there year round now. We have, across the 2 different properties, we have nearly 10 hectares, and that is on 10 different vineyard sites. And that's quite common on the right bank of Bordeaux, to have lots of small vineyards separated. Left bank, where the Medoc is, it's much more estate vineyards and much easier to deal with frost protection, because you can install these huge windmills which will cover, 10 hectares at a time. But we have three different systems that we're working with. Firstly, it's the candles system, which I'm sure some of you have seen pictures. It's absolutely beautiful. You put these small candles, they're about the size, each one is about the size of a paint can. And I think you need 200 candles per hectare. If it's going to be a frost between 0 and -2, and then as the frost gets more colder, goes lower, you need more and more candles throughout. The idea is you light these candles, they raise the temperature a little bit, but it's more about creating this fog which covers the vineyard. The vines potentially might still freeze, but it's always at sunrise, which is the most dangerous time, because if you've got any frost on your vines, on the green shoots, and the sunlight comes through and it touches it, that's what it effectively burns the shoot, and it absolutely kills it completely. By having that layer of frost, when the sun is rising, the sun beams cannot actually penetrate directly through
to the is like a cover almost.
Exactly, almost like a blanket. Yeah, exactly. So it gives the time to defrost or dethaw a little bit. It helps warm up, so hopefully you're not even at that stage. And then you have less burnt shoots afterwards. And then on top of that, we have 2 different frost fans. One which is a small fan which will just rotate in a 360, going all night long. And when it gets down to, I think it starts at about 2 degrees, and when it gets down to -1 degree, it has a heater which is built into it, which will actually put up some hot air, so it helps blow that hot air around the vineyard. The idea is to not let any air stagnate, because that's when you get the frost settling as well. And then the very last system, it's another frost fan, but it has a head sort of tilted like this. So if you imagine on the ground level, where the vines are very close to, it would be around 0 degrees. This is actually much higher than I'm giving you perspective of, but it's pulling down warmer air from above. So if it's about 0 degrees here, you're hoping it's going to be around 6, 7, 8 degrees up here. So it's pulling down the warmer air to, again, blow it around the vineyard a little bit, stop any stagnation happening.
And I'm guessing in the vineyards where you're using the candles, you're not going to be using the fans as well, because otherwise
it's it blow out the candles.
One or the other.
Yeah, exactly that. Yeah, one or the other. And generally speaking, if you're going to have a frost, it means that there's no wind out anyway. That's why, because any wind would help move the air around. So for the candles, it's not a problem.
Charlotte was just saying before we started that it's been 20 degrees today in Bordeaux, which is, although very exciting when we're looking out and the weather in the UK is totally pants, it's very it's a little bit unnerving for you guys and the grape growers, because it's going to be accelerating bud burst and bringing everything forward, which leaves us a bit more vulnerable to spring frost.
Exactly. It's always nice to see the sun, but then you kind of want it to go away.
I promise you no one in the UK will ever say that.
Yeah, I know.
Well, the subject of climate change, and then we must move on to the last wine. Climate change, what do you think? Lots of people talking about different varietals. Is this something that you guys are thinking about, or do you have any other mind-blowingly wonderful strategies which you're going to take on the world with?
I mean, there's climate change is really a real thing in Bordeaux. Last summer we had the hottest summer we've ever had on record here. We had basically no rainfall. I think from end of April, it was 30 degrees for the entire summer, plus some weeks. We had whole weeks in July and August at 40 degrees. It used to be a weekend here or there, and 2 days at 40 degrees was insane back in the day, whereas now it was kind of just the standard.
But not even just thinking about the vines, thinking about you guys in the winery at that time. It's
really
tough.
Yeah, and for the boys in the vineyard, you know, we're starting work at 6 a.m. and finishing by midday because it's just too hot to be out there otherwise.
Yeah.
So we really felt it last year, especially from the lack of rainfall. Anywhere where you had vines on gravels or young vines, they were really suffering, losing leaf. It was we actually had the right for the first time in the whole history of Bordeaux to irrigate our vineyards, which sounds lovely in theory, but we're just not set up for that, and nobody is. I think after 1 week of having the right, it was declined that we were allowed to use, well, not us, but everyone, any natural water sources, so no rivers or lakes or anything like that, because we were depleting the water table. Quite rightly so. So, you know, that means that you're using mains water. I think on average, you need to put something like around 10 litres per vine per week to even make the slightest difference. And, you know, when you imagine you have 8,000 vines per hectare, and we have just 8 hectares.
Not practical.
It's not practical, and you're doing that by tractor, by going back and forth through a winery. It's not sustainable. Somewhere which is established to do it, like New Zealand, where I've obviously worked before, their vineyards are all established with this from local water sources, or they have their own wells or water sources, so they can do it. But for the future of Bordeaux, the new varieties that have come in, I think it's a very good idea to be able to introduce new varieties. At the moment, it's only for the AOC Bordeaux appellation, so we don't have the right to plant anything else yet. I don't know how that will change in the future, but I think what you are seeing is a lot of winemakers making their own decisions, being ready to lose the appellation if they can't, if it's a matter of, you know, keeping their vineyards alive and having production to sell. So we are seeing other varieties cropping into the area, and they will just be sold as, you know, Vin de France.
Yeah.
But it's interesting to see. This is really the start of it. So in another 5-10 years time, I think we will see a lot more of that. Different varieties that are better suited. People are really considering, when planting now, the rootstock and the clone. That's something that's not so talked about. It's more variety, but rootstock and clone is very, very important, because that really establishes your vineyard. After that, the variety, it's about how they cope and when they're ripening. But you can get very rootstocks very susceptible to drought, and that really does help. And then it's about really canopy management and fruit management as well. You know, we're dropping a lot more fruit, so reducing our yields, but in order to give the plant less stress throughout the growing season, trying to ripen only 8 bunches rather than 10, you know, it makes a big difference.
And will you make that decision literally, well, what stage would you make that decision?
It's always a scary one, because I would like to be able to make it when you have sort of the fruit, the bunches come out straight away, because that's the easiest time to be able to. But then we have to factor into all the other things. You know, we have hail in Bordeaux as well. And if you have a hailstorm come through anywhere between April to June, July, it can take out some of your bunches. So you've got to be a little bit careful. For me, I really like to do it before veraison. So it's, for me, June, the end of June, early July is really the best time, as long as it hasn't been too dry beforehand. If it's been dry beforehand, that might push my hand.
Decision. Yeah. Okay, the final wine. I'm sorry, we haven't got very long to talk about this, but wow, I love this one. Clos Cantenac.
Yeah, so Clos Cantenac. So this is a big wine, and from 2016, it was a very big year as well. Very warm as well. I think it was followed by 15, which was also a great vintage. I think the wine is fantastic. For me, it needs a little bit of time still to open up. If it was decanted, probably should have said this at the beginning. If you had decanted it, it should be looking great now. But an hour in a decanter, or just a lot of air in the glass, give it a lot of air, and it really does change. It comes alive. It's a big wine. But yeah, as I said, 16 was a great vintage. So
yeah, I heard well, we were talking about 2016s the other day, and I think everyone said 2015 was the greatest vintage ever made for a while, and then 2016 came along, and it's kind of I think given everyone a bit of a shock. It's just they're drinking so beautifully now, aren't they?
yeah, I think so. There's a lot of debate which people prefer, and I think it comes down to personal preference, really. I think
Real freshness, isn't there, though? I think
it definitely is, and I think the 16s have quite a nice acidity which actually runs through them as well. The 15s are beautiful wines, probably slightly more blockbuster, but the 16s, I think, a good way to 16, I think it's going to age beautifully. There's just so much potential behind those wines.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I feel slightly naughty drinking this now because it still feels like a baby, but it as we were discussing with the style and the way you're making the wines, you can drink it now and it's already delicious, but it will keep as well. I think that's
absolutely
very clever winemaking.
Yeah, no, I think this wine is something that I've actually, kind of almost skipped it a little bit because I think it is a big wine. Oh, the 15 sort of aged, came around a little bit earlier. The 17 we don't have much of because of the frost, but almost the 18, it's kind of sits a little bit in balance with it. But the 16, I think, is one that I come back to every year, and it surprises me how young it still looks. Beautiful, but like how much longer it's still got to go.
It's got bones, hasn't it? It's going to keep on going. This is 100% Merlot. I just saw a question about the blend.
Yes, it is.
So I have to ask, and I hope you don't think me impertinent, but the Saint Emilion classification.
Yes.
Would you be very kind and explain briefly why it's relevant, what I'm talking about, and what you think?
This is a very big topic, so I'm going to do my best to explain briefly and hopefully cover as much as possible. But it's a big topic, and a big topic for debate at the moment as well. The Saint Emilion classification. So when it was originally done, there was, and please don't quote me on this, apart from there was two Saint Emilion Grand Cru Clos A's, the very beginning, and that was Cheval Blanc and Ozone.
And they were seen as the top wines, the A's.
Two, yes. Now, then there's a classification B, Saint Emilion Grand Cru Class A, and then Saint Emilion Grand Cru, which we are sat at. Unlike the Medoc, which was done in 1855 and has never changed since, Saint Emilion is reclassified every 10 years. And that is something which is quite interesting, apart from the fact that there has been so much controversy over these. I think in 2012, Angelus moved up, as well as Chateau Pavie. And most recently, we've had the classification done in 2022. Before that, there was a lot going on. So the owner of it turns out, and there's been court cases. You go on the internet, you'll find far more information than I can give you in this short time. But it turns out that the owner of Angelus had really been, for a better word of it, bullying some people into moving them up into the classification in 2012. He's a very important person. He sits on the panel. He's got a lot of money and a lot of influence within Saint Emilion. And I think this was basically the reason why Chateau Angelus became a Grand Cru Class A in 2012. Now, when this reclassification was happening was at the same time as all of these court cases going through about him and the way that he approached all of this. He was still sat on the panel, and he was still putting a lot of influence on people to move up the classifications of other wineries that he was involved with.
I mean, the chat in the boulangerie must have been.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Still going on a little bit. So really, this whole court case, it's very interesting if you want to look into it. And And yeah, he was found guilty. He paid a very significant fine. But before he was found guilty, Cheval Blanc and Ozone decided that they wanted nothing to do with this appellation, this anymore. They said the whole thing is a fast. It has nothing to do with wine quality anymore. It's all about you know, who knows who, and who's got the, you know, the biggest bully in the playground, who's got the biggest amount of money to push around as well, a lot of cash, and they wanted nothing to do with it. So they both pulled themselves out, rather than, because each year you have to submit a dossier, a folder, if you want to stay as where you are, or if you want to go up. And there's a lot of money behind that as well.
And this is big as well. This is big news because these guys are some of the biggest players, you know. They're really
absolutely. They're huge names, and to pull away from something like that is very significant. So they've pulled out, but become the same classification as what we are. So that makes me feel quite good. Just a Saint Emilion Grand Cru. And so there's a lot about that, and about anyway, after that, after Angelus were found guilty of what they were done, they decided to pull out of the appellation as well. So they're also now just a Saint Emilion Grand Cru, which left Chateau Pavie being the only Saint Emilion Grand Cru Classé. I'm still not as sure if I actually agree with them, because the Pavie family own half of Saint Emilion, so I'm not sure, but we'll leave that one alone for now. And in 2022, Figeac got moved up a classment as well. So there is still two of them at there. The other side of it, you know, for us, we are a Saint Emilion Grand Cru, not Grand Cru Classé. We have never put in a folder to move to upper class, because from the very beginning, we saw it as something that we would probably never achieve. Not because we don't have the quality of wine. I think, you know, when we look at our scores compared to a lot of Saint Emilion Grand Cru Classés, we are on par, if not above some of them. I think we sell our wine for a similar price. We get beautiful notes from journalists. Really, it's a cut. But that's what's sort of upsetting about the classment. It isn't about just the wine quality. You have to prove the history of the chateau, and we are new. The name Clos Cantenac goes back a couple of hundred years, if not more. But there's a big gap in the history of the winemaking. Still, there's some of the original vineyards, but they were selling the fruit on and not making any wine. So we can't prove any of that. So we've only got 15 years worth of history to talk about. We don't have a big chateau, and that's one of the requirements that you have to have. You have to spend a lot of money on, you know, your visitor center, and how you're going to improve your tourism and things like that. They're all things that I understand are important, but not necessarily quality driven to do with the wine.
Fabulous wines,
and that's our goal. And so the fact that all this controversy has really been brought to people's attention is actually quite great for us, because people are starting to understand the difference and what it really means, and not just looking at the name on the label anymore or where it sits. You know, they're looking at journalist reviews and the scores that they give, because at the end of the day, the quality of the wine is what should be the most important part.
Well, I can definitely say from the wines I've tasted tonight, you are certainly achieving that. I'm conscious that we are over time. I have one more question, which was a burning question from more than one of the sales team, which is, if you don't mind answering very quickly, and your chicken isn't burning in the oven, if it is, I'm very sorry. What's next? What's next for Clos Cantenac and Seraphine?
What's next? It's a very good question. Right now, we're taking a little pause on any brand new projects. Dad's busy. He's going to hate me saying this, but Dad's 68 this year. he's running the two companies. He's also busy in Aristea in the South African wine, which you know well from Private Cellar as well. You know, I think he's getting to the stage where he just wants to breathe a little bit. I'm now 4 months pregnant, so we're expecting a new little winemaker in the family coming this summer in time for harvest, in fact.
Congratulations.
So thank you. A little break on any brand new projects. We do have ideas in Pomerol. It's been a long time idea of Dad to grow Chardonnay in Bordeaux. Nothing in the pipeworks yet, but he actually did start a project at Château de Seur, which never really went anywhere because it ended up being close to when he was selling. So the vineyards got pulled out straight after he sold, unfortunately. But I think Chardonnay and Bordeaux are very, very high-end quality. A small amount could be.
I love the ambition
for the future as well. If any of you have met my father, you know he's got 1,000 ideas, and
well, I'm particularly enjoying that. I said, what's going on? You said, oh, no new projects, and then you
yeah.
this stream of things going on. Well, thank you so very, very much. And there's a lot, I don't know if you've seen the chat, but there's lots of people saying congratulations and delighted to hear the news. We love working with you, and I hope that it's been a good insight for everyone who's been able to join. Thank you for your time, and thanks to everyone else, and enjoy your chicken and enjoy the wines. And
thank you very much as well. It's always a pleasure to be here with you guys. Always a pleasure working with you guys. So thank you.
Perfect. All right. Good night.
Good night.